Jennifer Negon, thanks for being with us. Jennifer, the pipeline was originally proposed in 2013 by Kinder Morgan with a price tag of $7.4 billion. Of course, we know the federal government ended up having to step in and buy the pipeline. The final price tag, $34 billion. Was it worth it?
Not if we're overpaying for that much. I think, the federal government seems to make a lot of deals that seem to overinflate the cost at the end. And I think, if it's costing that much, I don't know whether or not it's worth it. But there's going to be a lot of people that are, pro oil and gas that are going to see this as a win either way. But whether or not paying that type of price is worth it is an entirely different question.
Right. Negon, as I mentioned in the intro, this was a divisive project, even amongst Indigenous peoples. To some, it was desecration to Mother Earth. To others, jobs, economic sovereignty. Can you walk us through some of those divides?
We have to go back in history a little bit to the world of 2016, which is around the time when the Trudeau government decided to intervene and, in the end of the day, buy the pipeline. Just coming out of the time of Idle No More, there was a real split in Indigenous leadership in terms of kind of Indian Act leadership or elected band council leadership, and then what we might call traditional leadership, particularly in BC with hereditary chiefs and so on. So we saw this similarly with the Wet'suwet'en and the Coastal GasLink pipeline. There's a real split in Indigenous communities as to on the issue of pipelines and on the issue of resource development. And so in 2016, the attempt by the Trudeau government was to try to quell this by taking responsibility for the pipeline in what had become a rather untenable situation. Now, the reason that this pipeline got built was because of the pandemic. The pandemic intervened and stopped any activism for both Coastal GasLink and for Trans Mountain. And those projects continued, as well as many other projects, for instance, Manitoba Hydro projects here in Manitoba. And so is it been right? Well, certainly it's happening anyways. And while it's split Indigenous communities, those rifts have still not ended. In fact, I would say that the schism is probably more developed. But the fact is that, Indian Act leadership or elected bound council leadership are often trying to create some sort of economic livelihood for communities. So good, bad, great, ugly, they often see this as the one path to be able to, for sustainability, financial sustainability, but the community sees it as a real dead end in terms of cultural ways, or perhaps just water and oil, because we know that these pipelines go through reserves. They fail environmental assessments, and they fail on the issue of consultation, which is a constitutional requirement.
Jennifer, there are Indigenous groups that want to buy this pipeline, and I say Indigenous because the Métis Nation of Alberta is or was part of an ownership group looking at this. Is this ownership something you think should be pursued?
That's a really tough question because this gets into the conversation around self-determination. I've been on record saying that I'm going to let nations make the decision what's best for themselves, but then that's also really tough because, like Negon said, if the leadership is making decisions that the membership also don't want, that's another conversation that's opened up, because we do talk about self-determination. We saw 24 nations buy into the Enbridge pipeline deal, but what do the membership want? What do the leadership want? And also, what does economic reconciliation look like? And I think this is going to be a conversation we hear a lot more about, especially as the Liberal government just announced their guaranteed loan program, basically streamlining a way in for nations to buy into projects exactly like this.
All right. Negon, what do you think the last decade and all that has gone on with the Trans Mountain expansion means for future pipeline projects in Canada?
Well, it's exactly what Jennifer spoke about. The fact is the federal government really doesn't matter what stripe, liberal or conservative. They are deeply invested in Indigenous lands and resources and will stop at virtually nothing to be able to hammer those things through with the kind of Indigenous leadership that they want to work with. Sometimes that may have the support of a First Nations or a Métis community, but what we've seen most oftentimes is they're not operating in concert, and it's leading to more division in communities. The fact is that the federal government needs to get out of the way. And the reality is that communities need to make their own decisions on how they will govern themselves first and foremost, and then we can get to the issue of consultation and resource development. Because the fact is that we still have this Indian Act which continues to rain down a imposed structure, and that when communities, a handful of communities have moved in this direction to be able to govern themselves and have that recognized by the federal government, we need to have more of that, and for communities to be able to govern themselves. And then there's a legitimate partnership led by the community, good, bad, great, ugly, and no community is uniform, but a community has to decide how it wants to be governed on its own and then work with the federal government, not the other way around where the government comes with a already decided upon project and then how much do we pay you to make you happy.
Nico and Jennifer, we'll have to leave it there, but great to have you with us again this week.
You got you.